Hi, welcome to Rise and Thrive with Daniella Schlisser. I am Daniella Schlisser.
Yay.
I have as my first guest my very, very, very dear and old friend, Harley Swedler.
Not that old.
No, you're not old. You are not old. The friendship is old.
Yeah, right.
We are eternally young.
Yes.
But the friendship, 30 years now?
Yes.
Maybe more.
Yeah.
Oh, more. More. 30 plus years.
We're only 40.
So that's true. I know some have that. Yeah. And in light of the sort of leitmotif of this podcast, which is reinvention, repositioning oneself to thrive, I couldn't think of anybody better to have as a guest and my first guest than you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for being here.
A pleasure.
All the way from Paris. Mm-hmm. You who have so aptly reinvented yourself so many times over. So I'm going to read you what I saw in Wikipedia. Wikipedia describes you as an architect, designer, artist, filmmaker, writer, and culinary professional.
Pâtissier.
Right. Well, yeah. So is there, when one is as adept at reinvention as you, is there one persona that feels more like you? Do they all feel like you? Is there...
I think the persona that feels like me is sort of being in the vortex of change all the time. So the reality is most of those, what we would say métiers, most of those vocations or professions or interests came about, except for architecture, which was a more deliberate study, came about in a very serendipitous way. So part of it was organic, part of it was opportunity, part of it was interest, and they all seem to, in a certain way, you have to be relaxed to be able to do a lot of different things and try. Doesn't mean I do, but try and do them well. So it's a lot of being open, being curious, and then a certain rigor, learning the skill sets that complement those interests and those curiosities. So all of it feels like me, just like I think I don't identify as one particular group.
That's so
in my own personal life. Uh-huh. I'm many things. I'm a father. I'm all those professions and interests. I'm American. I'm Canadian. I'm French. I'm Jewish. I'm a citizen of the world. I'm also very specific in the way that I live. So, it doesn't really feel like a title works, and that feels natural.
That's so interesting. That is not, knowing you as well as I do, that's still not the answer I would have expected.
That's interesting.
That's so interesting. So would you say, all right, so when you say that reinvention for you has been something organic, like I think reinvention for me, when I became a real estate broker, coming out of financial devastation and a need to find a career that would support my kids and myself and be flexible enough to care for my kids.
Which I remember you working very diligently.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
With great rigor.
So thank you. But that was very deliberate. And what you're describing sounds the opposite thereof. It sounds much more fluid and organic.
I suppose so. There's a self-directed portion of what you did on a larger scale that I apply to various components of the work and also in my personal life. But for example, I did a piece, I was commissioned to do an artistic piece for a museum in Berlin. And one of the skill sets that I needed in order to express the concept was to learn how to do Photoshop, which I did not know how to use. I had a basic tutorial in it. And I hired one of my sons, because my son had no patience to teach me, my younger son. So I hired his best friend, and he sat with me, and I took notes, literally like a scribe.
Yeah.
And that was how I learned it. It was through trial and error, but also, really understanding the mechanics of it. With an eye towards, okay, this is how you do it. And the same thing when I started making films and videos. In those days, I was using iMovie, but I started shooting without having any knowledge of how to shoot videos, how to shoot them properly, certainly no technical capabilities. And I used to go to the Apple store and I would bring all my footage on external hard drives and I'd be like, help me. This is what I want to do and this is what I want to make. How do I get there? So it is. I
That's
mean, I think
interesting.
in anything that you do, yes, it sounds very romantic to say it's all organic and serendipitous. The reality is the interest or the opportunities are of that nature, but behind that, there's a great deal of knowledge that has to be learned in order to practice any of those things and to express yourself.
That's really interesting. Do you recall ever, so for you, the trajectory was architect to, well, let me see how they do it in, architect, they say architect to designer to artist.
Yeah, it was
That's interesting.
It was a little bit like that. I went through I went through my architectural training.
Yeah.
So I had a kind of interesting thing. I came from Canada, where I grew up and where I studied. I wanted to escape desperately from and now paradoxically I love being there. But I grew up in Ottawa, which was a smaller big city. And I came to New York right out of school, and I was very fortunate. I was kind of driven, but I came from a school that had an alliance with Cooper Union in those days. So I was able to get a job. It was the early 80s. It was relatively easy.
Didn't you work for Richard Meyer then?
Well, before Richard Meyer, I went to work for a firm that at the time was called Passanella and Klein Architects, and there we actually, Joan Rivers came to the firm through somebody that she knew. She was interested in an apartment that a client of the firm had owned, and she wanted to buy it. And the client who owned the apartment, as a way to sell it to her, came to our firm and said, over the weekend, can you please come up with a way to show Joan Rivers that this apartment can be what she wants, because I really want her to buy this apartment. It was at, I believe, 61st between 5th and Madison.
I think it's the one that she lived in until she died.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So I was the architect
that.
under, of course, the partner in charge. I think I was 25 at the time. So we came up with this scheme. She wanted a grand. She had happened to mention to the owner, I want a grand staircase and this and a library. So over the weekend, very uncharacteristic for me because I'm much more of a contemporary architect. We did these grand drawings with columns and all of this in the ballroom space.
It sounds like it was that way until she died.
It was that way until she died.
Yeah.
And I
the way you designed
finished,
it. I took great pride in conveying that frequently without even being certain. As it sold, I kept saying, well, my friend Harley designed that.
Yeah. So, of course, under the tutelage of the owners of the architecture firm. So she ended up buying the apartment and she hired us. So I used to go back and forth to Bel Air with her and the partner in charge. And she would leave, we used to have voice recording machines. I guess it was about 1986 or 85. And she would leave sometimes messages at my apartment like, Holly, it's Joan. I want to talk to you about the library. Call me back. And it was, it was like, for me, this kid from Canada, like knowing somebody famous, it was like a miracle. Yeah. It was just like astonishing. And it was really a great project. Not my architectural style, but I loved working with her. And she was, what you see on TV or in the movies of when she was alive and thriving was really how she was, and a great generosity of spirit. So I worked there, and when that project was finished, she invited me to the Four Seasons for lunch. I was already working at Richard Meyer, which was and still is a more contemporary, very contemporary architecture office, white buildings. Yeah. He was well known as a group of 5 architects that I studied in school. And she invited me, I was already working there, she invited me to the Four Seasons for lunch. And it was the first time that I was nervous when I was with her. We went Friday, like power lunch, like 1 o'clock Friday afternoon at the Four Seasons. And everybody was like looking at us, and I was still a young kid, and I was nervous. I remember that. I remember being like really kind of shaky, and not because of her. She was, I knew her already for 2 years at that point. And then I went to Richard Meyer, and I finished off my architectural apprenticeship there. I wrote my architectural exams, which was no easy feat. In those days, you had to do it all in, I think it was a 4-day period. It was torture. It was 9
And it's 4 years, right? The apprenticeship was
The apprenticeship for me was 4 years because I was educated in Canada. So my education was recognized, but I had to do 1 extra year of apprenticeship. Then I was eligible to write the exams. I became an architect, and I really never practiced again. I mean, I do some architectural work with specific clients.
Yeah.
But it was great being at Richard Meier. The projects were fabulous. There was a lot of interesting clients, big museum projects in Europe, which I was very enamored of. And for me, it was a great place because I went into that office wanting to learn how to be a practicing architect, write my exams at the end of my apprenticeship, learn how to do working drawings, which I've never had to do ever since I was there. But I wanted to go through that process. And most of the other people that came to that firm had come from Princeton and Harvard and Yale and some of the good design schools in Europe. So they were, not that that's necessarily a characterization of, or it has to do with where people went to school, but they wanted to work on the glamorous part of architecture, doing the design competitions and the render. We used to do hand renderings in those days, and doing all of that. And I wanted to toil and really learn, like, how do you put a building together? How do you specify everything? Yeah. So it was a good
Do you
process.
find that the fact that you wanted to toil as opposed to wanting being attracted by the glamorous piece of it, is that something that carried you through the iterations?
Absolutely. So, for example, when I did this whole series of music videos called Dirty Movies, which I filmed. And as I said earlier, I went to the Apple Store with all my hard drives and learned how to put these little 3-minute movies together. There's a duality to that, which is, on one hand, it's creative and it's expressive and it's performative, and I'm in front of the camera and I'm moving and I'm fake singing and lip syncing. And then I
love those videos.
Thank you. And then the other side is that I go into my studio or my living room or my kitchen or whatever with big iMac, and I plug in my hard drive and I edit the videos down to, 1 second of video is normally 25 or 30 frames. And I edit sometimes to 2 or 3 frames at a time. So to get through 3 minutes is a work of toilage, shall we say. So I always love that kind of very, very tight monastic work, and then the very kind of loose and expressive and creative side. So I think that experience in the early days of being in New York and working in those places really kind of informed me and fed both sides of my brain.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So so when you left architecture, if I'm remembering the sequence correctly, just from having been your friend all those years, you went from architecture to Pottery Barn, right? Was that what came next?
Pottery Barn came a little bit after that, but I did go into, as you cited, I did go into design. So I started doing what I called functional art objects in those days. And it was kind of like a very late 80s, early 90s thing. So I would design objects or art pieces for clients, almost as an architect designs a building. So I would do concept sketches and I'd go back and forth with the architects, and then I would find fabricators who would make these objects for me. And I always found it
like my candles, like my shop. Okay,
exactly.
That's how you made those,
right? So I always found
that was beautiful.
I loved the process of working with people who had commissioned pieces, as in the case with you, but the actual work of getting it produced with artisans in New York seemed there was like a real disconnect, and it was always kind of tortured to get people, to do what they said they were going to do.
Right.
And I always worked.
I don't think that rests within art.
Yes, I agree. And I think for me, the thing that drove me crazy was that I don't want to say I gave them, but I always created this kind of partnership. So, I gave them their payment, and I said, well, how would you do it? Because they're the experts with the actual materiality. And I was the designer. So I said, this is what I want to achieve. And they would say, well, if you do this type of connection or that. And then they were always late. And I hate being late, which came. I have another story regarding lateness that we'll get to after, when I was at the most recent job I had in New York. So that kind of drove me crazy. And that kind of led me to this idea of designing my own line of homewares, I went to a company like Libby Glass and designed the glasses. And Libby Glass has a process for doing things. It's not an artisan.
The trust glasses.
Right,
and
exactly.
Those were not for Pottery Barn?
No. I did that whole series of design pieces, and I worked with big companies who manufactured, and I would, do the smallest lot that I could do, like 2,500 pieces or 3,000 pieces, and they would manufacture it. And it was such a smooth process because they always had a system, a template, and you could do it this way and you could do it that way, but it was always perfect and it looked manufactured, which I really loved. And those I sold in a kind of bespoke way to the Guggenheim Museum store and the Whitney Museum store, like to Nordstrom a little bit, Fred Siegel in California. So that was like a very interesting process for me. But like fashion, you have to keep producing. So you do one line, and 6 months later you have to do a second line. So it was like a constant investment. Pottery Barn had seen the pieces that I had made at a trade show, I believe in San Francisco. I was represented by a company called Filamento. Iris Fuller, she was phenomenal, a real fireball. She had this great design store in San Francisco. So she took my pieces to the trade show because I did not like doing trade shows. And Pottery Barn was walking the show, and they called me and they said, "Oh, we really loved the candlesticks that you made, and we would like to do something like that." And I'm like, "Oh, you would like to hire me to, commission me to do that?" And they're like, "Well, we were more like seeking inspiration." And I was like, seeking inspiration is a euphemism for something else that I don't want to say in the podcast on air. So I said, why don't we come up with a contract and I can design them? And that's what we did. So that's how I got to Pottery Barn.
Don't you remain the only person who has ever had his own brand under Pottery Barn?
It kind of feels that way. I don't know how it's morphed over time, but in those days it was like
and yet
deal.
Again, another thing that I say frequently.
No, it was,
but I'm pretty confident that you are the only.
In those days, it was a bit of a Herculean task. And to work with their attorneys, it was a very, very. I mean, it was a.
How old were we then? 30?
Yeah, probably around 30. But I kind of learned from all of those experiences because I was like, I want to protect my, if you want to call it intellectual property or my work. And then again, that other side of, having to work with attorneys and go through contracts. And I made mistakes and I learned from doing all those things.
Well, that's actually, those are questions I wanted to ask you. Like when you look at all the morphing and all the reinvention of going from one medium to the next medium or skill or, passion, vocation. Is there something that you can identify as being a thread of how you approach something, how you create something, how you manifest something? Or does it tend to be specific to what it is?
What's happened over time, going from architecture to the work that I do today, is it's just gotten more and more personal. It's gotten more and more. It's sort of like my own personal experience is a vitrine or a window or a passageway to a more universal experience. And I think that, when you read a good writer or you hear a good lecturer, that, when they can internalize their own experience or feelings or, what they got out of a specific situation and make it universal, that's the appeal for the reader or for the viewer.
So are you saying that your work has become, your work product has become more personal?
The product, the way it's produced has become more personal. So
for example, what would be the difference between how you would have done?
One of the examples that I gave you was learning how to do Photoshop in order to create this piece for the museum, which had to be a large scale piece. But I've incorporated my own physicality as I've aged more and more into the work, because I think that there's something relevant about somebody who's older. I'm 61 years old.
Agreed.
Kind of taking over a youthful persona and projecting just the energy of that. So when I do these music videos, it's music from when I was 18 and full of hope, and I didn't know that anything could happen to anybody that I cared about. I thought everybody was going to live forever, and I was very optimistic. I hope I still am.
I love that about the videos. There is such a fabulous optimism in that.
There's no costume. There's no tricks. It's an older person shaking and moving as if they did when they were 18 and flipping as if they did when they were 18 years old.
Yeah. The work product is more personal. coming back to where we left off.
Yes.
How about the approach, the systems? Do those tend to remain the same, or have those morphed as well? Have you noticed ones that you discard, or have you noticed skills that you have that seem to be carrying you through? Because in that analysis, I'm thinking, given that our leitmotif is really, reinvention and rising from adversity and thriving further, there, it's something, people wonder, how do I tackle this? Do I use my old systems, or have I decided that my old systems have failed because I've departed from them, or I'm taking a different direction?
That's a really interesting question. I think I can intuitively answer that, and that is that I love jumping off of a cliff. Except paradoxically, I'm terrified of heights. But I kind of just I'm going to try this. And then if I fail, so be it. What's going to happen? I mean, there's not, unless it's health,
right?
There's not a lot of consequences to fail or, hurting other people, which I would never want to do. There's not a lot of consequences to trying things.
No, I agree.
I'm willing to be humbled. And so I think maybe that's the thread, and maybe that's the system.
Yeah.
That, there's kind of no shame or embarrassment in trying something. Some things work. I have done performance art over the last few years, which I had no interest in and was never expecting to do. And the same thing happened with photographic work, which I do love, but it was not anything that I ever kind of, if you will, marketed.
Right.
I was doing other things, and I was using photography as a way to draw people to video work or whatever. So that's where that kind of organic or serendipitous thread comes in. But that's an external thing where people have asked me, "Oh, can you do this or can you do that?" You noted that one of my interests is culinary. I worked with Martha Stewart for many years. It literally,
of course you did,
just happened.
I remember.
We built a home in Long Island to raise our family. The home was published in Interior Design magazine. The photo editor, who was a Danish woman named Pernilla, who was great, brought a photographer from Paris when she was shooting interior design. And I made them lunch, and they were shooting.
I remember.
Styling and whatever. And a year later, she called me and she said, "I had such a nice time at your home when we shot it for interior design. I'm at Martha Stewart now. I'd love to use it for, as a backdrop for Martha Stewart Living products, I guess hand towels and plant holders and whatever it is." And the scout came and they shot it, and they wanted to use the house. And in those days, she said, "Okay, so we really like it. We want to do it. We can pay you. No, it'll be $25 a day." I'm like, 25 people? She's like, "No, a certain amount of money." That was a multiple of 25. I was like, "What? To do, just to be at home?" She's like, "Yeah, that's what we do. We send you the insurance certificates." So again, a situation that I knew nothing about, insurance certificates and people in my home.
Right.
And, again, a kind of memorandum of understanding or an agreement of some sort. So I also love all that kind of business stuff that you just have to know in order to get stuff done. But during that first shoot, I was making my own creme fraiche in the kitchen for the kids coming home from school and pulling cookies out of the oven. And the guy that was running the shoot said, "Okay, what is going on here? We're eating out of stainless steel vats in the other room." From a sort of mediocre caterer, and you have this beautiful table with all this stuff and pitchers of water.
I remember those tables.
Well, it was all.
Yeah. Yes, but it was perfectly aligned.
Well, yeah, we tried. And we have a shoot next week. We really don't want to go to this person's house. They're not. You are. We'd love to come back, but we want to hire you to be the caterer. And I said, "Well, I'm not a caterer. And the guy pointed to his he goes, "You're a caterer." He goes, "So you just need to do this 3 times a day for 18 or 20 people. And we'll pay you for it, and we'll pay you to use the house again." So that's how that kind of adventure started. So
that was awesome.
That's a real example of something that literally just happened. I wasn't, and similar to what's just happened in Paris. There's a cafe that I go to every Sunday with my boyfriend. We go and sit and have a coffee. And
is it still Gitan, or did you go somewhere?
It's kind of the opposite of what you think a French coffee shop would be. It's very contemporary. It's more something that you'd find in Copenhagen. So very contemporary, very light wood. As they say in France, very bobo.
Yeah.
So young. Upwardly mobile people with babies, if they still say upwardly mobile, and
they probably don't.
They probably don't, and very TikTokable or Instagrammable.
Yes.
And I see that they've been doing a lot of pop-ups with a florist or another baker or whatever. So I wrote to them and I said, I did this business with my kids. We had a scone business and we sold at Grub Street and Hester Street Fair. So I'd love to do a little experimenting and come in one weekend and just do sweet and savory scones. And I brought them so they asked for a meeting. I brought them some samples and they're like, listen, we would actually just love for you to come in and bake 3 mornings a week, like permanently. And I was like, in France, it's impossible to get hired to do anything after the age of 50.
Yeah,
forget 60. And I wasn't looking for a job and they proposed it. And I just said, yeah.
That's okay. So awesome.
So I'm
So there again, something,
I'm a pâtissier in France, which if you told me, what's your dream in life? I'd be like, to be a pâtissier in France and be careful what you wish for. 6:30 in the morning.
It's so fabulous.
It's fun.
So as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking you must need a certain amount of self-confidence, which I think of when I think of my own, jump into real estate where I had no safety net whatsoever. Do you feel that way? Do you feel like a confident person who assumes he'll be able to tackle everything? Or do you think we as people can navigate change and reinvention this way without that?
I think like you, I have like a, and especially as you get older, you know what you're capable of and what you're not.
Yes.
That's not necessarily in specifics, but like I can try this, I can tackle.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I feel at ease. Let's put it that way. I don't know if it's confidence. I feel at ease with whatever the situation is. I don't mind a little bit of discomfort, kind of like a pebble in your shoe to kind of like get you going. And then the rest is like I often just learn skills while doing things.
Right. And feel confident, I imagine, that you can.
Yeah, I think I can. I also, once I get there, I know what my worth is, what my value is. Like, okay, I actually know how to bake.
Yeah.
And I know how to present, and I know how to do it well. And I have some flops, like everybody, and that applies to my artistic practice, my personal life, and it's fine.
Yeah.
Like, no one's. I guess I don't take it that seriously.
That's great.
I'm very rigorous, but I don't, I think that, it's not a war. I'm baking a cake. It's fine. Like if it's bad, one day there was a mix up and they didn't know if I was there or not. And they called me at 6:30 in the morning. They're like, are you at the shop? And I said, yeah. Cause I go in alone in the morning and I do my thing. It's very zen. And they said, because we didn't see the alarm go off and, that somebody had turned the alarm. I said, everything's fine. I said, also, if I wasn't here, what would be the worst thing? You would go to the grocery store across the street and you would buy like French like cookies. No, you don't even have to go to boulangerie. You could just buy like packaged stuff and mix it with Nutella and serve it in cups and it would be beautiful. It would be fine. So
well, see, so that's interesting because if I take that, I'm thinking about that, and as you're saying it, I'm thinking about it, and I'm wondering, can that be the case for anything? And if I think about it in my own line of work, we get very uptight about, there's a lot of, there are big numbers involved in a real estate transaction and a lot of players who feel very seriously about it, the client, the buyer, and the seller, and the attorney, and so forth.
There's a lot at stake.
But if you macro it somehow and identify, this is just one thing. Yeah. And it's not just one thing in the scope of everything I'm doing, but it's also just one thing actually, for you it's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world.
And I think that I wonder, like, do you think you had that perspective younger? Or do you think that comes with age?
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely with age.
Yeah.
Even with my kids, I don't know how you feel about your relationship with your kids, but I've pulled back. I mean, there's things that I'm kind of very specific with, but I mean, 20 years ago, I was like, we got to get to the doctor. You got to do the essay. You got to do this. So, it was like, I was very tight in,
Yeah.
and now I'm not.
Yeah. Age is fabulous.
Which is fabulous.
And on that note, I want to thank you so much, much for having come. This was the best gift, having you as my very first guest.
Oh, that's
and
so
thank
sweet.
you for such a wonderful conversation.
I feel exactly the
and
same
for the
way.
Prosecco.
And the Prosecco,
which
cheers.
we will drink now.
Thank you for your generosity
Cheers.
of spirit and your curiosity and just for being you. So much fun.
I love you.
Love you too.
Long time.